Thank you, thank you, thank you, and thank you. So today I thought I'd think out loud about ways of seeing that articulate the world. I'm kind of glad I'm following up Natasha because it's quite close. I'm interested specifically in architectural rendering to unfold its many sensibilities in the realm of AI and synthetic visioning mechanisms of today, and through that to rethink the dominance of geometry as a core competence of architecture as well. To think of a kind of observatory, a way to articulate things without ever denying a subjectivity, and on the other side, without ever denying an objectivity. It seems like a fairly kind of commonsensical ideation. Nonetheless, we see quite a stark contrast between architectural programs from engineering or arts universities. How is it that we can even expect to communicate with the world at large, as even within our so-called disciplines, conversations rarely carry across? I had always studied and taught exclusively at art schools until ETH, which is the most technical of universities. Suddenly, all references you have, all precedents, all the jargon, it shifts into a completely different terrain. The audience, the market, the publications, the economics, and even buildings change, not to even mention the kind of geographical distinctions. You can throw them all out and start afresh because nobody knows what you're going on about, how things work, what things are, and what even is architectural research in this kind of collapse of paradoxes that we call architecture. So within this game of pretensions and siloed specializations, I see both AI and architecture as very, very similar in the sense that they both are generic, both geometric and harmonic, both interested in just about everything, both always within and never without the world in which they operate. There's a reason why architects are early adopters of all technologies. Similarly, there's a reason that last year both the Nobel Prizes for chemistry and for physics went to Google, to AI. I also want to talk about cycles, spirals, circles, circuses, and circuits, and see how these rotations yield and engender objects. So this Hadin showed yesterday as well. I love it. I mean, as a millennial, you kind of have to love Reddit. On one side, we're talking about a scarcity of natural resources, and on the other side, we are flooded by data. Noise, noise, and more noise. Evergreen stretching from horizon to horizon. Unfolding spaces and times in multiples, in double, quadruple, exponential scales. Now, within the sea of noise, how do we navigate? How do we find precious things? How do we model, draw, articulate projects when in the fertile grounds of the internet, we have environments, scans, texts, HDRIs, whole buildings as 3D models, even algorithmic models that we can deploy at a moment's notice. The foundations of the internet already triggered these questions and concerns. The sheer connectivity of things, where anything can be related to anything, where causalities between disparate worlds can be constructed in a flash, where conversations can happen across times and spaces. A utopia that is slowly coming full circle. I saw this yesterday, where even the dreams of alchemists and polymaths are beginning to ring true. Perhaps we are slowly learning to see the world again. Today we see a simultaneous presence of the simulated, the sensed, and the generated. The act of seeing has acquired yet another artificiality. Millions of truths, divergent but interconnected, are gathered into one. Refractions, diffractions, reflections, physics, mathematics, politics, they all play their part in a new scale of visibility, a composition of a whole out of many, many, many wholes and disciplines and sciences. So this is the same technology that we see when we go through security check-ins, when they tell you to leave everything inside. This is also CT scans. This is also in our phones. It's the same technology, completely agnostic to its application. Midjourney, DALI, ray tracing, Instagram filters, all part of a new scale of optics. And this is not unlike the Renaissance or the Golden Age of Islam. The state-of-the-art imaging technologies of today take fake pictures, even though we still refer to the lenses in our cameras as objectives. Al-Biruni, Newton, Feynman, Einstein, I don't know, Goethe, all have participated in developing ways of seeing and talking to the universe. Funnily enough, none of these ways of seeing become obsolete, but they establish deeper continuities. They find their way into how we work and the instruments that we use, computational or not. The Greek and Muslim ideas of intromission and extromission are still with us today as the two principal modes of 3D rendering, ray tracing and rasterization. And this has been a kind of motivation for my own work, dealing with found objects that are then manipulated based on drawing and rendering conventions. The act of observing, collecting, and composing effectively, akin to the quantum mechanical observer. And then we can turn this around and think about what environments could possibly host these new aliens, a blossoming of a world from objects. Or we can think of particular genres of architectural representation, pixelation, camouflage, nesting, linearity, and so on, that can turn operative and engender objects through this operativity, which of course then can be 3D printed and introduced back into the realm of the physical. And then you can display them in an archaeological exhibition. And then you can subject canonical architectural projects to them and recompose them into the pretension of a building. And then you can submit them all as a competition entry and not win anything. And these are not purely sculpted objects. They all work as architectural proposals with spaces that satisfy the requirements, functional or not, while also kind of perpetually playing games of mass and void, inside and outside, figure and ground, assembly and sculpting, so on and so forth. But what of the elements of such a mechanics? What of its composure? Perhaps we can find clues in the inverted relationships of the Wunderkammers to the garden and the garden to the theater. Funnily, they were generally placed very close to each other. In some Renaissance palaces, even serving as vestibules, each leading into the other, inverting relationships. So hosting the tripod modalities of architecture, what Carla just mentioned as well, what we call section, elevation, plan, and perspective. So my intention is not to kind of build a legacy of this, but to unfold these things into sensibilities rather than medium-specific definitions. So one is where nature, automata, and the instruments of measure all occupy the same stage, and the other a place where we see the birth of atmospheres, where characters gather and unexpected affinities sprout. The third, where they harmonize and engage in a public talk, the private, the familiar, and the public. One that is intimate, intensive, and portable. The other is extensive, expansive, and vast. And the third, which unfolds in a plethora of formats and media. Models of the world of the model, and the life of models. Collecting, connecting, displaying. Tools, instruments, devices. Objects, spaces, scenes. Inside out, outside in, face to face. However, these categories are not exclusive of each other. Yeah, this was a funny discovery. I mean, everybody knows this painting, but then I figured out that there's a lot more to it just by the caption that was next to the painting. Hilarious. So Botticelli paints a scene from Greek mythology and brings it roughly 2,000 years ahead. The gods and goddesses, their postures, gestures, analyzed ad nauseum by critics, tourists, and even botanists alike. Let's employ some new eyes to see what goes on here beyond the pure logics of it. So we have the eyes of text, of Wikipedia, of books, of asking ChatGPT. We can slowly build a kind of, much like the black hole, a kind of tomography unfolding the layers of sensibilities that are present here. We can jump to social media, and we see yet another unfolding, now carried, filtered, revived, animated in a plethora of formats and colors across the internet. Suddenly, these histories don't seem so locked in. Suddenly, they open up in new contemporary ways. The new lives of more than 500-year-old artifact, evergreen, alive, and vivid. Times and histories do not move solely in a linear progression here, but also unfold in spirals and manifest as discrete events as well. And then, of course, we can step in and employ even more layers of computational analytics. We can look at the edges, we can look at the orientations, the orthogonalities, the textures, the colors, the depths, the temperatures, the frequencies. I have 20 more of these, but I won't show them to you. But also objects that Botticelli meticulously documented. A geometry emerges, not just Euclidean or Cartesian or Gaussian, but a geometry of information, a complex manifold of all these many geometries laid out in 2 dimensions. Slowly, the theater appears, hosting a garden, hosting a Wunderkammer, bursting with life, composed through a centuries-old ritual. More than 500 species of flowers were observed and painted by Botticelli. These are flowers that only grow in spring in Florence. Some have been identified, some have gone extinct, and some were absolutely invented. They're fake. They all lie, these painters. Symbols upon symbols, stories upon stories, nested, rendered, screened effectively, adding resolutions both quantitatively and qualitatively. We can also train our own models to see through these dimensions. In this case, there's an Oxford database of flowers that you can train your own computer vision models on and extract the location and name of each one of these synthetic flowers. And the ones that are fake, you can ask ChatGPT to invent names for those. So a Wunderkammer of the Tuscan spring appears, logistically labeled. The theater of measurement starts to perform a play. Quite a contrast to the large language or large kind of generative models of today that consume everything. A boundless appetite consuming all that you or I have ever produced or will produce, stripping away all stories to create perfect, seamless images that say nothing most of the time. What of the legacies, the indexes, the provenance, the precedents, the journeys that objects undertake with the many subjectivities they acquire in every new space? Perhaps there are ways to bridge the generative with the indexical. Like here, we can turn our Botticelli-trained eyes to articulate anew, to word the generative. Building a database of the flowers, turning it into the constituent of a large image prompt. Yet another spring from analytics to text to image to a scene. Or here with a massive text prompt, and Sora responds, showing us a new spring from the textual inputs. And then you can turn this around once again and begin to imagine some new friends that will be engendered by this fertile meadow, embodying the mythologies, locations, connections that we've built. And then they can travel again to new places, talking to other friends of ours and taking part in conversations across times and spaces. But what of the stages? What of the compositions, the spaces, the rooms where these characters, images, models could travel to next? What about the architecture that can host these myriad aliens? So this is 52,000 projects from ArcDaily, basically all of it, that I mapped onto a space that pretends to be multimodal, and it kind of actually is. So this is based on Clip by OpenAI that connects images to text. And this is one of the seminal models that helped all these image generating algorithms of today. But you can clearly see that the space of images and the space of text remains firmly separated. It's like a geographic formation. This is what's called the multimodal gap. Nonetheless, it affords new affinities in a logistic, probabilistic sense. Images of one project begin to show up through the text of another project. Matches unfold more matches. The aesthetics take a back seat, and objects connected through their embeddings start to appear. Of course, we can then expand it by introducing our own text and reverse search for multiple renderings of affine scenes. The generative heart of Clip turns into a keeper of objects, introducing an indexicality. Of course, we can do another reversal as well and get descriptions of images. Text and image start to play operationally together, although in a semantic manner. However, this is not a semantics of the past. This is a semantics in times of fake news, a pure illustration of a 512-dimensional space. It's a kind of synesthesia that we now live with all the time, where models trained exclusively on text can identify where a color exists on the spectrum, where we read images and we see text, not unlike architectural drawings. But of course, we can also unfold this database, specifically in the case of images, and deploy it by embedding it in other spaces to extend the idea of modeling and rendering. Instead of the generative, we can get suggestive. These objects are always talking, playing, being part of the composition of scenes. I've always hated modeling because I'm generally terrible at it. Actually, I'm not bad at it. Everyone else around me has always been way better. The same goes for coding, by the way. But then I learned to fake it. The Suggester is an add-on for Blender that I developed, kind of inspired from some of Jimmy's experiments, that takes screenshots of the modeling space while you're working and suggests similar projects from a database of 1.5 million images. Renders are not truths of geometries or simulations of light. Computer graphics are and have always been a mechanics of fakery. A face pretending to tell the truth, purely representing dimensions that are beyond the senses. Purely through the scenes, we can begin to model as a game of illusions rather than a fully realized, complete and consistent 3D model. We can begin to weave together an idea of space that is connected through its characters, through its narratives, through its times, movements, and suggestions of connections. The projective streams between them let the imaginary enter, harmonies connecting geometries, images hosting geometries. These are my dioramas that try to unfold things rather than lock them down, that are less about the truth and more about a suspension of disbelief. So with this sensibility, I became involved in the initiative to start the first design studio at the Institute of Technology and Architecture at ETH to see how we can fundamentally think and develop architecture through the lens of AI and yet not be exhausted by it, to keep the generality of things alive, to keep the genericity of things alive while introducing a gravity. Technology here is deployed in service of the project, a cultivation of a kind of tool agnosticism. Through this, we can open up a space where any and every tool becomes available to you, no judgments. In a way, then every season of Meteora also becomes a catalog of available tools and techniques out there. We are currently in our 12th semester, probably the last one, let's see. But then we'll do a book around it, which will be launched early next year to kind of seal it as a project. So the posters of each season, which I kind of spend an unholy amount of time to paint, embody a kind of sensibility for each season. These are the weathers of Meteora, an architectonic state set with three elements: a protagonist, a site, and a global problem. a problem not to be solved, but to add new resolutions to. Architecture becomes that which then puts these problems on the table to be discussed in a public manner. Each season, we try to think across cities, scales, and sites, from single-family homes to large public structures to city building. The studio works with 3 artificially intelligent instruments, each corresponding to the tripod constitution that I showed earlier. We work together with many precedents. It also takes out the established authority of masterpieces as untouchable entities. Instead of a kind of formal progressivism, historical legacies turn into genres, formatted and reformatted to infinity. The question stops being what is the correct architectural expression today, to finding appropriate forms and expressions from any time that relate to one's project. It's very short. We write for 3 weeks, we make videos and color our text for the next 3, and we devise a building in 6 weeks. In particular, the 3D model search engine that I was part in developing together with my colleagues works with the renderings of each object instead of the geometry. Just through this kind of jump in abstraction, it becomes multimodal. We can search it in a space of qualities beyond semantics. I'll play a teaser for the studio to kind of give you a sense of it. This is what we prepared for the London Design Biennale, I think, a couple of years ago. I'll just play it.
I wake up to a screen. I talk to people miles away. I say good morning, they say hi. Because the world is fast, bright, and colorful, full of ideas and intelligence, all serve for an electric feast.
These games were classic. The only learning skill, and they don't care what
I collect beautiful objects. They are intelligent. They are of many colors. Together with them, I can access an abundance of concepts, recycle them, play with them, use them to create my own architectural position.
and it's motivated by the global development of the world. So we are taking this challenging stand.
I am an architect in love with the internet. I am friends with AI.
And it's completely different from what other languages say. So that's I'm very fascinated in how you're doing it.
Can something be completely clean, or are we always constantly moving towards the states because something can always be cleaner? Will we ever stop cleaning?
In times where individuals ask themselves, what can I do, what do I know, what am I, and obviously never find an answer, we need to be reminded that it's okay to not know, to be in chaos.
My whole life I've spent studying every musical masterpiece of the last 10 decades, trying to learn what exactly makes a song a classic. And it was in this moment that I finally got it. A classic is a song that has never finished saying what it has to say.
We bond over books, TV, music, movies. We expressed our shared opinions on Jean Didion, J. Dilla, dubstep, Escape from New York, sports, and Mexican food. Yes, yes, no, and yes.
I sat on the balcony and watched the swimmers. They looked like Apollo, Mars, Jupiter, Adonis, Hercules, Narcissus. I saw the structure of bones, the origin of muscles, and so many different natural and noble positions and poses.
Thirsty? Do you want pineapple, papaya, guava, peach, coconut, apple, orange, strawberry, grapefruit, pink grapefruit, cherry, apple, strawberry, or grapefruit? Do you want red milk, vegetable liqueur, or mushroom saliva? We only have ayran and kombucha here.
All my projects start with the intelligence of everything. I develop my own search engines with AI concepts and atmospheres for my architecture. Ask Alice is my search engine to write my own stories from thousands of books. I search for texts, concepts, and expressions related to my interest. They become the building blocks for my story. I copy them, reframe them, play with them. My voice talks through many of the voices. Panoramas of Cinema is my search engine to curate images from thousands of movies. I search for architectural elements, places, objects, and environments. They become the atmospheric mood board for my spaces. Search No More is my search engine to compose scenes from thousands of precious models. I render my stories and temperaments on stage. I draw with many of the hands. I develop an architectural position, building on thousands of years old tradition of thought and imagination, and celebrate my hyperconnection to the world.
So just to jump gears again, but now I would like to talk about a couple of experiments that I conducted together with Agostino and Mira Roman, who's still in Zurich, I think. And these are just the last couple of years as part of my PhD as well. And I mean, it's a bit freaky when you're finishing, kind of close to finishing your PhD on AI and architecture, and then ChatGPT comes out, and then Stable Diffusion comes out. Hilarious, right? So we are all kind of embroiled also in this vicious cycle of FOMO. So every single day there's a new model that does the job twice as good and in half the time, and it's every bloody day, literally. So this is why these kind of, when these models came out, Agostino and I, we kind of sat down and we wanted to abstract from their performativity and also think about what would it mean to establish an architectural office, just the two of us, with a host of intelligences that these models could possibly facilitate. So we decided to develop abstract architectural schema that could capitalize on them without becoming obsolete when a new model or a new generation of the same model comes out. So these are three projects. In the middle, we have Automata at Court, which is where we let LLMs ideate a constellation of events for the Palace of Versailles, taking the mythology and rituals for each location in the canonical palace. LLMs in the City is an attempt at unfolding multiple scales on an urban level and tapping into the repository of the city of Barcelona by bringing it into conversations with LLMs. And on the left, we have 1001 in 1, the rewriting, restaging, and recontextualization of 1001 Nights through LLMs. All of these experiments work with LLMs in a logistic manner, just to tap into the kind of quantitative productive power of these models, and also perform a kind of role-playing mechanics to snap out of the genericity of their production. Each one of them steps into different realms of architectural history as well, but in a kind of humorous manner, and not to kind of log these things down. With each one of them comes an article as well, all written with a different model of GPT. Not really, we spent a lot of time writing these articles. And it's every single time it's a way to kind of test out how to talk about these models, how to talk about these sensibilities, and also testing out how to sell it to particular audiences. For each one of them, we devise a logistic framework, a schema that that becomes a drawing board for the theater of these speculative projects. Through it, constellations of multiple models and levels of abstraction are put into motion as characters. So this is the last project I want to show you, 1001 in 1. It's an exhibition, a book, a scenography, and a party, articulated out of 1001 Nights, or Arabian Nights as it's sometimes called. No edition of 1001 Nights contains 1001 stories, or even at times 1001 nights. For the time, it was purely a large number, like Google today. It's an unfathomable quantity. It also introduces locations, performing like a theater where stories from any time can be told and retold on a new stage. It contains stories from very many places, from very many languages, from very many times, but frames them through the introduction of the unreliable narrator, who is Sherzad. In this way, it becomes almost like a large language model of sorts, which in turn produces a whole lot of new editions and translations into many and any language. Like this one in late 2023. So we invited a lot of people showed up, and a lot of them didn't either, but it all happened just in one night. To kind of set up this experiment, we had a coding environment, Wolfram Mathematica. We used GPT 3.5. Now we have GPT-5, which should be better, but still I don't think it would make a difference for our setup. So we accessed it through the API for text generation, and then we used Midjourney V5 at that time for image generation. And we deliberately went for the most kind of public models that even my grandmother could use, just to kind of snap out of the engineering and optimization hole. So the logistics runs through our own unique databases. So the Wunderkammers that I showed you earlier, the search engines, they serve as the basis. Why is it so blurry? So they serve as a kind of obstacle course through which we can guide the LLMs. So the earlier search engines, they are built on top of Xenoteca, which is a database for books, and Paradiso, which works for the image search engine that we have. So through a chain of prompts, Xenoteca paired with ChatGPT directs the text and the narratives, infusing them with distinct flavors and styles. Paradiso paired with Midjourney influences the coloring and direction of images with its cinematic content. Both of these databases are private, consciously biased, valuable, and adaptable. The commonsensical world of concept art and endless fan fiction shift when influenced by the works of handpicked writers, directors, characters, and artists. The schema here works sequentially and in parallel. Past responses partake in future prompts, taking each of Sherzad's nightly tales as a siege. Our logistic framework travels through the latent landscapes of the LLM. Texts are written, characters are cast, places located, windows opened, tables set, objects chosen, songs selected, and flowers picked to enact a new scenography. The table knows the window knows the place, and the place knows the time. Fully connected, fully electric, and fully digital. In a matter of a few hours, we get a full table running on the logistics of our schema. 8 large LED screens are placed. A table faces a window, domesticating the industrial laundry space turned exhibition space. A physical dimension is introduced to these ephemeral stories. A new story unfolds. All 1001 newly rewritten and staged nights come together in a book and staged in the same space. Every 30 seconds, the scenography changes. A new place, a new time, a new flower, and a new object, along with a new song plays. This is what it kind of feels like. And this is what happens. Next scene, ChatGPT role plays as Michelle Serre, while Midjourney imitates Peter Greenaway, constructing a stage together with Keith Haring. Massive Attack plays Teardrop, and on the table, broad strokes and tin cans. The window opens onto a street that could belong to a Layton, New York. feels quite real, doesn't it? Here are a few vistas from 1001 in one. A new edition of an ancient tale brought to life once again. And as per tradition, it doesn't stop there. 1001 also conceived a table. The same screens utilized in the exhibition are now hosted in another smaller frame. The AnyTable is electric, it's alive, and you can just plug it in. And that's it.
Thank you, Adil, for this amazing talk. I mean, I love your work. I also like the work.
I love our work.
But it's like always so cool to see like all the kind of different concepts and terms and images that you bring to the table and create this like generous garden for us to think about at the edge of crypticness. And I hope that there are some questions in the audience. Whilst maybe we let it ferment for a bit longer, I'm super intrigued by these what you call the animals. No, wait, friends.
Both.
Both. They're so
friends.
Weird. And I think they connect to like a theme that like we had also yesterday, especially with like Alexandra's talk, where we had these kind of objects that kind of like start as robots to kind of start in varying motions and start moving towards you, and have Lamo as like a moving layer and can crawl towards you to like help you. And here in this case, these objects, they are something, they're like now like not in the three-dimensional space, they're like robots help, but they're like in the AI space. And what they do in the next slide is they connect kind of completely disconnected places. So they become kind of invariants in the most diverse semantic pockets of Midjourney. And I'm also puzzled, but like I'm thinking if this is kind of like if this is lauding a new way of like how we think of objects, if this is like a new way of like how we fall in love with objects, how we see them as subjects, how we utilize them to bring us to places or to make sense of disconnected things, or as much as they help us in not getting our fingers burned when we are baking cookies. I don't know if there's something about robotic and intelligent objects that is kind of new.
And I think we are truly in a time where these kind of entities, they have a certain whim about them. They are kind of not purely this idea of robotics that we knew of. Even the word robot comes straight from slave. So it's directly a master to servant relationship. So with automata or with these kind of LLMs of today, we are in a different space because we are in a space of probabilities. We are in a space where it's never directly what you ask for. You always get a little bit more or a little bit less or a bit more judgment or a bit less judgment and so on. And then you have to talk to them. There is no way for one to get an immediate kind of result from out of these things. And then what I find fascinating is just to kind of, these kind of random architectural games that you take a croissant and then you cut sections out of it, and suddenly there's a pretension of architecture. And then the same thing with these kind of animals, that they can just travel to a separate place, and then you have to completely rethink what they're talking about. How are they participating in the crucifixion of Christ? How are they participating in Hopper's kind of depressive scene? Do they belong there? Do they not belong there? And also to be able to talk to these kind of masterpieces. You just insert something, throw something at them, and then they talk back. So these objects are always somehow intelligent and constantly in conversation. And this is what I hate, so this kind of locked down histories that you can only talk about Hopper a certain way, that you can only talk about Picasso a certain way, and so on and so forth. Like, we need to do something with these things rather than kind of just receive them from the masters above, the art history masters.
Fantastic.
I have a question. Hi, thank you so much for a really diverse and kind of intense presentation. I have a question regarding curation and a curation in context of kind of a historical realities and fictions, especially in context of kind of a changing narratives and shifting narratives that are based in a historical factography, but start to be reinterpreted in a sort of a very different way. And I'm wondering, how much do you care about these forms of interpretations as entering the forms of different propaganda, right? And just to kind of frame the question a little bit more specifically, just as you started talking about the kind of a relationship of the robotics and the slavery, there's a sort of, the word robot was actually coined by Karel Čapek, who is a early 20s fiction writer, and his RUR novel on Ransom Universal Robots, where the sort of the word robot or robota is actually a Slavic word, which means work or labor. It doesn't mean slavery per se. It's just being rethought through the kind of a context of the early 20th century and invention of the robotics and a cyborg as a sort of an intelligent creatures, which renders human mind feeble, right? This sort of a narrative within the context of AI that we're facing right now about the purpose of one's engagement, what are the kind of the labor practices of the engagement, and through the lens of changing of these histories. So just like we tend to kind of stereotype certain histories or reduce the depth of their factuality, I wonder how you think of a curation in context of your work. Just as you look at the work of history and art, right? There, especially in a kind of a context of the let's say depth of the painting, the particular narrative that the painting has socially and culturally as a sort of a critique of that particular era, and I think we're facing those issues as a way of kind of fast way of changing the conversation, which I find both like fascinating and dangerous. So can you maybe frame the role of curation in this work a little bit more specifically?
Yeah, I didn't precisely get the last part of the question, but I'll attempt it anyway, and then you can just kind of let me know if it's working or not. I have a feeling we're at a, as you already mentioned, we're at a very strange time where things are moving very, very fast. And what I do feel is that there is no way to step back and look at it as this kind of phenomenon that is unfolding ahead of us, but one needs to become involved immediately with the mechanics of things and find kind of, at least for me, beautiful ways or kind of visions of the world that could be made possible by the possibilities that are facilitated by these things. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but I'm thinking more in the sense of it's hard to curate things without taking part in them, if you know what I mean. Does that kind of get there, or? Okay. Yeah, but I have a feeling we're always very quick to impose judgments, and I don't want to play that game. Just something like that.
always amazing to kind of see the sort of breadth of the discoveries. So I have two quick questions. The first one, well, influence the second, but my first question actually, what's with the flowers? And is there kind of like a larger, kind of reason for the fascination with gardens and things that have a certain growth cycle pattern?
Yeah, I just like them, and then it's also somehow been part of some of the practices that I worked with. That's very flowery practices, and then because I was always this kind of a person who was doing black and white renderings, and then suddenly things opened up, and I find it's quite a liberating experience to just kind of jump into this world of symbolism, because what is more symbolic than flowers? It means in a different culture, a red rose means something else, and then you get a white rose and it's a disaster and these kind of things. And then to imagine that you can have a space where you have 500 different symbolic objects, each as equally loaded as the other, kind of think about resolutions through that lens. This I find fascinating. And then this is also kind of connected with the Wunderkammers and how each object has a lot more to say than just the pure kind of display of them that we see in museums quite often as well.
And so the follow-up to that is also, because I think that there's a sort of connection to the kind of larger breadth of investigation, as you kind of talked about earlier, both in terms of, there's a model the other day, and the fact that things are changing so fast in this sort of technological pace, as well as, that everything is a process, right? Everything is something that's kind of evolving, growing, and changing at the same time. We're all kind of adapting in a different way. And the kind of like notion, or at least kind of what you showed in this view, is that that idea of how to deal with all these things, right, is something that we're trying to, like, I guess in one way or other, impart to the students. How would you think about that in this view where, as a profession, we're generally so obsessed with finality as an end result, right? Yeah. And then how would you say, how do we be okay with that by not being quote unquote finished?
Yeah, there's I don't know if you know Giacometti. So he had a lot of these kind of portraits and also sculptures as well, where it's just a kind of tracing of the eye movement, and it keeps on going forever and ever until an event happens, until something happens that it needs to be kind of sold. The subject sits up and walks away, he gets tired or goes to sleep, and then these kind of strange moments that suddenly urge a finishedness. So that's why I was talking about the idea of these spirals through which suddenly objects pop out, almost unintentionally. It becomes almost like the objects themselves achieve an autonomy out of these many circulations while retaining connections to everything around them. So I could take each one of these things and put them up separately as individual projects, kind of build a new narrative around it. But I find it much more fascinating that just through kind of rehearsing something over and over again, that's actually a show that is very much like that, the Rehearsal by Nathan Fielder. It's precisely that. Just the act of rehearsing over and over again can acquire a life of its own. And I think this is what I'm interested in, a kind of stasis, which is, just full of possibilities.
Adil, thank you so much.
Thank you for the presentation. I was like holding my breath. There were so many beautiful pieces that you showed, and I particularly got fixated to one of the quotes that you had in the video of Meteora, which was this girl talking of, like, this woman speaking about what classic means to her, which is something that hasn't been done, telling the story. And for me, I see a connection to the idea of how artificial intelligence and architecture are in parallel, because they are also relying on incompleteness. there is a sense that there is a lot, but never complete. And there is this trade-off between, novelty and tradition, so things that we know and things that we don't know, but that we like it just because there is this verge of not finished. In the same sense of not trying to write a theory of what we're doing, but rather keeping it generous enough for keep on the discussion of what it is to work with artificial intelligence and architecture. So my question is, if we're talking about it's not complete yet, and we have these modules on the design studio, and I always thought of them as like alphabets, and then you're using them to write a project, so you can use text to write a narrative, you can use images to, I will say write as a verb. It could be, verb model, just the verb to create something. Could you inverse the feeling that instead of saying, can architecture create language, maybe if language can create architecture, how would you say architecture creates language? I don't know so I'm just trying to turn the typical narrative of, yes, with language we can create architecture, but what will be how would you turn that around? And I think you've shown us, and all the time the whole time in my mind, this combinatorial exercise that you're doing with the modules, this idea of incompleteness that we have with these data-driven approaches. Maybe we have to change the narrative of how we always think about architecture, and I was curious to know if you've thought about it, or maybe I'm in a different realm or imagining things that, or reading things that I should not be reading from your work.
Yeah, I'm thinking along the lines if it is language at all, or if it's a kind of broken down, tokens of language that somewhat make sense to us, but then once they're broken down, they're processed in a completely kind of strange manner. Then it churns out certain results, and I'm thinking maybe language is just about a kind of coherence that is built up, and then also what I want to think about is not just language per se, but the crossover between text and images and how these connections are made. And I think in terms of the studio, the idea is not really finishedness, but a coherence, a proportioning between the text and the image. If one satisfies fully the other, then it becomes illustrative, where you don't need one or the other. But then to get to a point where you still need both of them, where they still have a friction in between both of them, thereby creating a meaning. So instead of language, I'm kind of flipping it to meaning instead. And I think that would be my kind of angle on that. From language to meaning, or communication, in that sense.
Amazing. More questions in the audience?
That also means we have a deep dependence on clip, basically. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, then you're officially released from the hot seat.